Welcome to the Pastor and Postmaster podcast. What you wanted to hear in the sermon, but you didn't.
And where the Academy meets every day.
Howdy.
Every day,
Yo.
we're thinking about eschatology. You're probably thinking, that is not what I'm thinking about. But if you're watching this, hopefully you know this is going to be a complement to the first episode, the eschatology flyover, which again just means the end times or the last things,
The eschaton.
not the retirement center.
No.
But that is what that word means.
What a cruel.
Yes, the sick
thing
person
to
who did
name
that. I
a
know.
retirement
They thought it was a Hindi word. No, it was not. It was a Greek word that means the end.
They were eugenics.
So we are,
Progressive
it's interesting with the passing of Pope Francis, the first and only Francis, the first Jesuit Pope, makes me think a lot about eschatology because if you read, a lot of the church's history from the Middle Ages onward, the rise or fall of the Roman Catholic Church is a big part of end times predictions for a lot of people.
Particularly in the historicist vein, which we covered last time.
Yep, which again is that you're looking at Revelation in a somewhat chronological look at the whole view of human history. So like, here's Constantine's conversion to Christianity. And at this point is some part of the Roman Catholic Church's papacy and things like that. So, by the way, though, oftentimes we read some older works, Luther, you read really most Protestant writers, the Westminster Confession, they will say the Pope is the Antichrist explicitly in some confessional. Yes. They're not the first to do that, though.
No way.
Yep. There's a group called the Spiritual Franciscans, the Franciscan order from the early 1200s. Actually made that statement way before Luther, way before Protestantism. So they're not the only, Protestants aren't the only group that just
Right. Protestants, Jehovah's Witnesses, Adventists are not the only ones.
are not the only ones that said. The Baptist, fundamentalist Baptist, chick tracks.
Chick tracks.
You picked up a chick track on that. So it's very interesting to see that, partly because, again, with the reference in Scripture to the Antichrist, you see like this incredible amount of power. And it's like, well, until the modern world with totalitarian governments, I mean, nobody had more power than the Pope.
That's true.
Economically?
Right. And even eclipse the Ottomans or anybody like that, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and the domains were farther. The highest point is a Pope named Innocent III. And to get an idea, like, okay, so if a king runs afoul with the Pope, then doesn't submit to discipline or whatever, there's different examples, but they can implement what's called the interdict, which is basically like that you don't have to, you at this point don't have to listen to the king.
And and another aspect of that, for those of us living in the 21st century who are evangelicals, the threat was to withhold the Lord's Supper, the host, which means
no forgiveness.
You're
of
dead.
sins. Spiritually dead. Yep. And people, I mean, there's a famous king named Henry IV in Germany, the late 1000s, 11th century, that was, outside a particular castle in Italy asking for forgiveness and submit. So there's an idea there's some positive things, I guess you could say, against the totalitarian governments or potentially despotic governments. But then there's also this incredible power that in history, many of the popes were quite wicked men. I mean, you can follow that. Everyone acknowledges that. So anyway, but I'm not making anything statements about that today. Beyond that, all of us do try to connect the Bible with our everyday experience.
Headline newspaper theology.
Headline newspaper theology. In fact, a friend of mine, and Daniel Adams, made a comment on that about reading Scripture in light of the newspaper. How much does it affect how we look at the end times? All of us do it.
Well, Jesus said, discern the times.
Discern the times.
And in the Olivet Discourse, he's telling you to look around. But that shouldn't be driving how we look at Scripture.
I think people have kind of built that up over the years. I don't think that it's unfortunately given people a bad name to those who do because we're promised a crown. Let's be honest. Those who eagerly await his return, people who are date setting and things like that are just so hyper focused on it. I think have kind of, unfortunately, it gives it sort of a bad rep to talk about it.
It is, and I think we talk about the negative. There's obviously been some positives, even for incorrect predictions. Like I mean, most of the missionary work done in what was the frontier of America,
Mm-hmm.
even all the way up to California, is very much driven by we are
Manifest destiny.
yeah. The millennium's either
City on
coming,
the
we're
hill.
in it, things are going to get better. There's a motivation, and it's not because we're waiting for like a nuclear holocaust, because this is obviously before that.
Right.
So there's an optimism. So sometimes eschatology can drive you towards good things as well. One thing I would say, certainly for our country, I don't know. I guess I've lived obviously in South America for 2 years, but with a group of people, Alcon people that weren't fully biblically literate, so we didn't talk a lot about end times. But I do think in our country it has a huge role to play, partly because of our Puritan heritage. You can look back to some of our earlier podcasts on that about Judaism in December. But the basic idea is that from early time, part of the cultural DNA is that this country is a city on a hill.
Yes.
Even today, they talk about American exceptionalism.
Right. And if you're in New England and even down in the southern states, you're looking around, you're standing in your village, you're at the village green, you're seeing white chapels, all your institutions are Christian, all the colleges, the universities are Christian. So yeah, we must be on the right side here, and God's doing a great work, and we're part of it.
Amen.
We're actually moving it.
And one thing about we can never escape totally the cultural and national and religious context that we live in. But there obviously have been different viewpoints. I want to just kind of we talked about this without rehashing last time's podcast. You can look that up. But basically, there are four views, and really four views that really are determined by how you read a particular passage in the book of Revelation, which I will actually just read out loud. Sometimes we make scripture references. I'm sorry, I didn't memorize it. I kind of know it, but yeah. Revelation chapter 20 says, Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and the great chain. And he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit and shut it and sealed it, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he'll be released for a little while. Then I saw the thrones, seated on them were those to whom authority to judge was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their right hands. They came to life and reigned for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. I'll just stop there. There's a lot hanging on those passages.
Oh my gosh, yes there is.
The meaning. And there are even new views on the millennium. But the oldest one, we'll talk about it, is called historic premill.
But before we get into that, can I kind of issue like a little bit of a warning to Kyla and Ryan? If we start to get off track, if we start to range a little too far away from the truth, I will have to, I will have to bring out the Larkin book, and I'll take you to the charts to get the conversation back on track.
AI
did not make those.
And I might even open my Bible. But Clarence Larkin is going to be right here.
He's right there staring at us.
If you are probably a boomer, born between 46 and 64, or even if you're a Generation
I was
X.
born, but I never identified with. I just, this is just. I need to say it. I never identified.
You
with
never had a chart. The charts are new. There were not charts. As far as I know, before this time, maybe because they just didn't have as much paper, right? It is on some vellum or something.
Is that on papyrus? What is that? Just kidding. I'm just joking, Bo.
I think he's the 20s.
The 20s. That makes sense.
I think so.
That view, again, as we said, is a new view. Well, that's
so. You have four then?
Four.
Okay.
The first one is that's the view that Bo has. Historic premillennialism.
That didn't just fall under premill, and that's how I've been seeing people like Joe Schmoes like me. They just see it as the three when they put Dispy and they put historical under that kind of umbrella of premillennial. Or do you want to avoid premill altogether?
You just premillennialism is a big
camp.
It's one of the historical views, and then after the 19th century, from the 19th century onward, you have it basically split into two groups.
Okay,
but then within those groups. As within any view, I think
there are subsets.
You're going to find some variations.
Absolutely, but the overarching is premill then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think as we go on, you're going to discuss the dispensational premillennial view.
Dispensational truth.
Yeah.
And I'm going to discuss the historic premill.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we're going to disagree, but we're under the umbrella of a.
Okay. That makes
We're
sense
part
for
of the
the
family.
for the ones who don't really quite dive into this subject often. That would be a easier.
Right.
Yeah, but the truth is that
Yeah.
view, even if I don't agree with it, is the most sophisticated in the sense of details
Yeah.
and textual. It's an elaborate system.
It is an elaborate system.
If you look at amillennials, there are not many people with amillennial
That's
charts.
why there's a promise, but that's why there's a promise, I think, in verse 1 or 2 that says, if you read it with understanding. I don't think that it was something that we were just going to open and understand, to a lot of people.
Well, now according to that book, you can understand it because of the chart.
Because of the chart.
Right.
But Bo, why don't you go ahead and just make the case, because you need to convince me, because I'm not convinced. So, well, I'm not like totally opposed, but go ahead, tell me premillennialism, why we should believe it, historic.
Why we should believe it?
Yep.
I think, well, there's a number of factors that come together, but first of all, I think it's safe to say that people thought that Jesus would return and initiate or inaugurate 1,000 years of peace before Satan is cut loose for the final time. So, in other words, the first resurrection is the resurrection to life, and so Jesus raises believers to life, and they reign with him on earth for 1,000 years, and that can be literal or figurative, a long time.
Yes.
And then Satan is released released to go out and deceive the nations one more time, and then you have the final battle, and then you have the resurrection of the wicked for judgment. So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. And
There are visuals do help.
yeah, that's true. And I will go out on a limb and say that seems to be the view of Justin Martyr and others in the first
Papias.
2 centuries, which doesn't mean that it's the correct view, right?
But there is significance that it is early.
Yeah. So I think it's the most natural reading of the text. When you see this happen in Revelation, and then the difficulty with it is when you bring in the Olivet Discourse and certain passages in
Just
Daniel,
in the Gospels.
and seeing how that works together. How you would understand the millennium in Revelation, because Revelation 20 is the only place
Really?
that we see a millennium.
Yep.
Yep.
And so
Half a dozen times, was it?
So I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at Old Testament prophecies, some of them concerning Israel, about this universal peace or universal rule of David, David's throne. And
There's a lot of those passages.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to see things a lot now. Historic premill people, they'll have different views, but I'm probably going to track through the Old Testament. I mean, for me, I'm going to track through the book of Revelation like an amillennialist. I'm going to come at it with an eclectic hermeneutic, an eclectic way of interpreting the book of Revelation, not just, as distinct from the Olivet Discourse and Daniel chapter 7. I'm just talking about Revelation. I'm going to see it the same way as an amillennialist or even a postmillennialist in some ways. So I'm going to see it as an idealist with a lot in the future and some preterism. In other words, some parts that have already taken place. And this is my final thing. I'll keep it tight. So my hermeneutic is going to approach the book of Revelation, which, that's where we get the millennium. So that's why I'm focusing just on that. I'm going to see that as an apocalypse because it's called the Apocalypse of John.
The unveiling.
Yes, so it's an unveiling, and it's going to be apocalyptic in nature. In other words, it's going to be very black and white. It's going to be good versus evil.
It's dark.
It's dark, and it's going to have a lot of symbolism, and then I'm going to see it also as a prophecy of things that are going to happen in the future. And probably the biggest difference between my view and Kyla's is I'm going to see the letters to the to the 7 churches as I'm going to see Revelation as a New Testament epistle that was actually circulated to these 7 churches. And I'm going to see those as actual churches in time, in space, that had these certain characteristics, not representative of historical ages, but it's a letter to the churches that we can all derive some good from, some understanding from, just like we would reading the letters of Paul. And so when we shift from these 7 churches into Revelation 4, I am not going to see a rapture. Because what a dispensationalist will say is the church is raptured in chapter 4, and from then on, it's dealing with Israel. Okay, so that would be my view.
And Bo and I, we will agree on. I would agree with a lot of what Bo would say. I think what differentiates. So really, we're talking about the 20th chapter of Revelation. I mean, when we're talking about, largely what Ryan had just read. So when I think pre-mill historicist and dispensation, I think the big dividing, I guess, factor would be the position of the rapture, mine being pre-tribulational, because I'm tying it into a few different verses, one being First Thessalonians. And so I would take a literal approach to that. I would take a literal 1,000-year reign. Christ touches his feet in Jerusalem down. And I think we go to him first. Second, he comes back and we come with him. We're ruling and reigning. I think martyrs are in there too. And so Bo really and I really wouldn't have too many disagreements other than that. And probably maybe concerning the state of Israel. So I'm going to take a viewpoint of Israel, and there's a differentiation between Israel and the church. Not that one has replaced the other. Both equal in God's eyes, but is the church being adopted into that, and Christ will rule through Israel via Jerusalem. And I really don't think there's much else too much that we would really disagree on. Maybe some timing of when, but pretty to me, pretty close. And if it wasn't for those two things, I'd probably be a historical. Pre-mill.
Well, the biggest thing that both of you would agree on, I think that, and our hearers probably either know this or should know this, is that, and that things are getting worse before they get better.
That's true. That was another point.
It's called a pessimistic view.
Yes,
that's important.
Yes, it is. It's a futurist, pessimistic view.
I agree.
So that would be again very common. Partly the reason for that is so there's a guy named Cyrus Schofield, and he was a Confederate veteran Episcopalian and like a lawyer, and he obviously is kind of a layman, but a late theologian. Had what's called the Schofield Reference Bible that had notes that was published, I think, in 1909. And so I guess he was financed by some wealthy businessmen who distributed many of these books, helped finance this. So people had access to the Schofield Bible, and that popularized dispensationalism to tens of millions of people.
Would it be safe to say, like, was it Huxley who was Darwin's bulldog? Is that who?
Julian Huxley? Or
I think it was Huxley.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so Darwin comes up with the theory of evolution. He's the academic, and then Huxley makes it popular. He's the one that takes it out. So like in dispensationalism, when you look back at Darby, who originated it,
John Nelson Darby.
Yeah, when you look at him, he was actually he was actually a very educated theologian. He was not some hack. He wasn't some backwoods guy, and so
in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and so he devised the dispensational system, but it's Schofield and Ryrie
that really
take it to the masses. Would you say that?
Totally. It's totally true. It's definitely, Carl Trueman points out in a lecture that it's one of the most important works of literature in the 20th century. It would never be on the list of great works written in the last 100 years, but it is the most influential.
Very influential.
More people have more influence. I mean, it had influence even on Harry Truman's recognizing the state of Israel in 1948. Then the U.S. is the first country to recognize Israel 11 days after their war. And it was against his own cabinet's advice. And he said it was just he had a deep sense that there was something important for Israel. He remembers as growing up as a Baptist in Missouri.
Yeah.
Think about that. They're like, don't alienate the Arab countries economically. It makes no sense. It's not in our interest to support Israel. And Truman said, we're going to support Israel. Had a rabbi come and say, you've been the best blessing to the state of Israel for 2,000 years. So he was in tears, I guess. So yes, that view is very popularized the Left Behind series, very important. Pentecostals, big part of their theology.
I've heard a lot of and that's weird because I remember us talking about this, but I have heard Pentecostals very, very, very recently, as of last week, say we are not the 1,000-year reign is not so they wouldn't have agreed with me at all. They would have said what is it, kingdom now?
They're
kind
shifting.
Of thing.
Yeah, so that's
it's not. I haven't heard any really that I've heard.
Well, there's a shift.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah, and that's going to be with like the
Bethel.
Yeah, and I mean, you had third wave.
Okay,
There's three
rabbit hole.
There's three waves.
So then, Ryan? What would you consider yourself for our audience?
So I would take the amillennial perspective. I'd have a quote. I was looking at my phone here, and you think, well, are you looking at your phone here while we're on the podcast? Well, there's a reason why. My friend Daniel Adams, I mentioned Daniel already. Daniel,
excuse me, I got a text.
Yeah, excuse me.
Me too.
You better be watching this, Daniel. I know that. So he has a view on a subset view, the newest view of premillennialism called New Creation.
Sure.
Premillennialism,
and then there's progressive dispensationalism.
Yeah.
So there's all these views of subsets. So he says, so this is Eusebius of Caesarea, important early church historian, talks about Constantine becoming a Christian. And he talks about Papias, one of the fathers that was from the 2nd century, and like Justin Martyr was a premillennialist. And this is what Eusebius says. He says, Papias says that after the resurrection of the dead, there will be a period of 1,000 years, which Christ's kingdom will be set up on this earth in material form. I suppose he got these notions by misinterpreting the apostolic accounts to grasp what they had said in mystic and symbolic language. For he seems to have been a man of a very small intelligence.
Whoa!
To judge from his books.
Fighting words. Good Lord.
So this, but let me tell you that mystic and symbolic. So if you read writings from this 4th century, 5th century, and really onward, the spiritual mystical readings are more important than the literal reading. That's this. If you're interpreting the Bible, we live in a time of scientific precision. We do not typically say a spiritual reading is superior to a literal reading, but immediately he would expect his audience would laugh like I did about that. Because he basically said this can't be literal because they're deeply immersed in Platonic, archetypal, spiritual truth is more real than this is.
Right.
Interesting.
So that view then, and like think about that assumption undergirds the reading. So someone like Origen of Alexandria would say he has a commentary on the book of Numbers, as literal as you can get, and he says everything has a spiritual meaning. Not everything has a literal meaning.
Right.
That's a book you gave me, actually. So I don't know if you endorse that statement. I don't know if you endorse that statement. Most of us would probably not endorse that statement.
It's a book about that.
Yeah.
Not advocating.
Not advocating. Everything has a spiritual meaning. We usually would say, yeah.
And how about Jerome? Does he say there's 7? Was Jerome the one that said there's 7 meanings to every text? Right?
I think, there's Clement of Alexandria that has the fourfold interpretation. Did Jerome say 7 meanings? There's endless spiritual meanings, by the way, if you go that route. Okay, look it up. Okay. Look it up while I'm talking. So
I can do 2 things at the same time. So
the amillennial view basically is the view that has the longest consensus acceptance by the church. So from Augustine of Hippo, Augustine, my son. No, he's much later than that, this Augustine. But he had the view that there is a... when Christ's kingdom has begun and reign, we're in the millennium. And I'd say, and with right qualifications, we're in it right now. It's a time when the kingdom of God's advancing. It is a time of both a mix of both good and bad together. It's the wheat and the tares. It's the good fish and the bad fish, all these parables in Matthew chapter 13. And so it's an ambiguous time. And it's a neat view because it's like Christ's kingdom initiates, Satan is bound in some way, and
It's
then
very
the
neat.
end comes.
Absolutely.
Now, the weakness, of course, is Satan really bound?
Right.
And again, probably
This is 20 or 21 where
20.
Satan's bound. This is all hinging on 20 still.
20.
Okay.
So what is that binding? Now, there's passages, if I'll make a case for it, and we can talk about the weaknesses. I know the weaknesses of the views, and I don't really care to convince you, to be honest. But I do think that there is...
You don't care enough about us
That's how they all
to
are.
leave us
That's
in
all
error.
millennials.
Kind of pastorism.
Wow.
If someone says, well, if it's the Satan's bound...
Well,
then why...
I heard Southern Seminary. I did listen to it real quick before.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you have a thought, but
No, it's
he
fine.
was Southern Seminary breaks down the three. He spends minimal time on the post mill, but basically what he says is Tuesday, Thursday, or something. Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. I am a amillennialist, but other times I am a
premillennial.
premill. He's like, they're both excellent views, and what you're talking about is what he was referring to. 6 different points of it. Yeah.
Exactly. And the newer views, progressive dispensationalism, new creation, amillennial,
Yeah, progressive, interesting.
millennial, premillennialism, basically kind of are there's more solidarity between the
Gotcha.
views. But yeah, the basic idea is like, what does it mean Satan is bound? And this is a difficult empirical statement because... But I think actually paradoxically this actually makes a good case for it, because what you say is the person says, look at all the bad things that are going on, and there's a selection of events that you typically fixate on, like the guy said, on Monday or Wednesday I'm in a bad mood, maybe after a particular, I don't know, election or some event, you're like, this seems like the end. Then another time you're like, there are a lot of Christians.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of great things going on. We really do have a longer life expectancy. So amillennialism can accommodate. Part of its strength is also its greatest weakness, is that maybe it's just too good to be true. It doesn't take a stand on enough stuff. That's the weakness. I would say about this, about the probably the rest of it for me would be that in the prophetic passages of the Old Testament, we got to read these together. See, dispensationalism divides these so much that they don't give as much credibility to the Old Testament, and I think that's the reason why people who advocate that view are in the positions they're in. But if you go to passages like I've just
Not
read
all of them, I promise.
Yeah,
Not all of them.
The book for the Jews,
jump
as they
on
call
that.
it, or whatever.
Yeah, that's where it gets dicey. But anyway,
And very, like you said, there's very few classic dispensationalists.
Right. As a matter of fact,
thank you. That's a good point.
I ran into Kyla over at the gas station, and I was just
We had
listening to
a
some
pre-meeting.
guys- Yes.
Pre-millennial meeting.
I was listening to some guys from Central Seminary, which is a Baptist seminary, but I don't know which denomination. But they are proudly dispensational, and they talked about having most of their faculty has shifted to progressive dispensationalism for that reason. And they would say they hold a complementary hermeneutic.
They're together.
That the Old and the New Testament complement one another, and we shouldn't be, because in the old days,
They're hardly divided.
yeah, what you would determine the meaning of a text in the Old Testament and then have to shoehorn it into the New Testament,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I don't want to get into detail, but and that's where I learned also. I mean, I think I knew this before, but progressive dispensationalism does not mean that we're kind of updating it for a 21st century church and
Gender
we're
neutral
getting with
language or
it.
something.
Yeah.
We're not stuck in the past. No, it means that in their view that God's history of redemption is progressive, which everybody agrees with, and they see a progressive aspect of dispensationalism where it's moving forward.
That's fair.
So you're not stuck.
Yeah.
Okay.
That gives
Christians-
light for more room for people like me maybe to say, oh yeah, I can
Yeah.
get on.
And Christians do believe in progress. I was reading a quote by G.K. Chesterton where he says, in order to believe in progress, you have to have a definitive, infallible belief in something. I mean, how do you know where you're at?
Right.
And so
What are you
Christians
progressing
Amen.
towards?
What are you progressing towards? If you're just moving, that doesn't mean anything. I think I would say this, though, about the Old Testament passages. Some of them will say things like in Isaiah 23, verse 7, it says, judgment on Tyre and Sidon, in Lebanon today, I think. And so but it just says, like, after 70 years, Tyre will be, will prostitute herself out to the nations of the earth. And there's passages like that where the numbers are a little bit like, it's not clear what the historical fulfillment is, that 70 years. And so, of course, there's the famous, the Psalm 90 verse 4, a day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is like a day. So there's passages, there's Zechariah 14, there's a day known only to the Lord that isn't like a normal day. And so there's a little bit of flexibility about time that I think if you don't read the Old Testament carefully, you might kind of forget, like, I wonder when that happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my reading.
I think for me, the tipping point on my stance, because again, I go back and forth, almost got some solid stuff. And then, even with studying as of late, the historical pre-mill position, I think where my emotion or the emotion of it, it kind of leans more, tips the scales, so to speak, to the pre-trib position because of the state of Israel's current, and not to say that I get on with all of the sentiments of Israel and the fig tree. And I do see the fig tree as Israel. I do see that. I do see that they are flourishing, and that is a miracle. That is a miracle to have a nation completely diaspora, right? And their language even. And now they're back and flourishing, and it's an incredible thing to see. So I think that was, learning about that was the nail in the coffin for my viewpoints on, like, I guess the rapture and the timing of it. Or just maybe even just my viewpoint and many people on Israel is we see the proof and the burden of proof. Is that what they call it? The burden of proof right in front of us. And we do see he's not done with them. Incredible. And so I think even if you stick Augustine and Luther, they would be astonished at the state of Israel and probably repentant over some of the things that they had said about them. I don't know if both of them said anything, but there was some sentiment there that a lot of people are turned off by when it comes to in regard to Israel, unfortunately. And I'm sure, I'm sure there was some regret there. But having said that, that's kind of why I tip the scales, so to speak, in the camp of the leaky dispensational. I don't know, whatever. I don't know what you want to call it. Maybe progressive. But that Israel is certainly there. And the fact that they have so pushed for a third temple, it's insane. Like, I follow the Temple Institute, and I'm like, this is getting real. Like, if we see that, we're going to have another episode. We're all going to be freaking Dispies.
They've already made all the implements. They've got everything in place.
Yeah. Without getting all, and the thing is people get their panties in a bunch, I guess. Pardon the idiom, but over the bread heifer and over these things. And it's like, okay, well, just.
Yeah. That sort of academic language is out of bounds here, because this is for the everyday people.
That's right. This is totally
Panties
appropriate.
in a bunch is far too technical.
It means disturbed.
Yeah. But people are excited, right? They want to see the coming of Christ, and I'm here for it.
Well, I think you hint at something that's important. So the framework, we say the word hermeneutic, which just comes from a Greek word meaning interpretation. So it's a way you interpret words. So your views in the end times are actually key to how you interpret. And so it's not just that the data comes in and you observe Israel nationally. This framework also helps you interpret. There's a back and forth relationship. Yeah. Like, you look at stuff outside, but you and I could definitely we could choose which stuff we want to focus on, and either become very cynical or become very optimistic.
That's why I've said last week, before I say this, you're just going to have to trust me, you folks. I know you guys trust me, but
truth.
But I apply the standard to myself, and I self-examine why I'm coming to these conclusions that I am. And I am like I'm kind of a schizophrenic in this way. I'm pretty optimistic, but I'm definitely a pessimist. Like I see things. When something comes up or happens, I think the worst of it, that it's going to turn out poorly, like Charlie Brown and Lucy holding the football. And so
I'll cheer you up.
I have to discipline myself when I'm looking at the passages regarding eschatology, the end times, and so forth. I have to take off my pessimistic spectacles that I'm looking through and try to just get to the text. And I've seen this among since we've seen this resurgent among our tribe, in our tribe of postmillennialism, I am detecting a sense of people getting on board because they want to touch grass, they want to raise chickens, they want to have clean food, and they want to create communities, which I totally am on board with. Like, I think that's awesome. But I feel like that might be coloring their reading of Scripture.
Yeah, so there are great things going on depending on where you look. And I'm just thinking, you hear about how many Christians are on the world, how much the growth has been the last 40 to 50 years, the fact that it's happening in places where there's still intense persecution. You could go like, wow, God's doing great things. And then you could also look at the bad stuff. I mean, you could look at the amount of children aborted. You could look at the transgender issues. You could look at materialism. So it kind of depends on what place you look at. And amillennialism, I think, in many ways, allows you to kind of maybe try to make sense of the ambiguity, because world history 2,000 years is very big and very vast. And so, anyway, so the basic idea then is that there's going to be an intensification of both the prosperity gospel, the prospering of the gospel, and persecution. So it allows a possibility that there may be an intensification at the end, or if it's more or less the same. But that's the view.
There were some questions like that came apart. And I just figured I would interject this really quick, because why do you think, gentlemen, since you've been in the Word and probably in the subject more, why do you think that Satan is set free and must be set free?
Sure.
A lot of the women were wondering that, and I thought,
Before the end.
Well, that's one of those issues that God doesn't tell us point blank
Right.
or straight up what it is. So we're left to speculate some.
you can speculate all
which
you
we
want.
don't like
Let's
to
go.
do. I
Yeah.
mean, generally. And
But
so
the whole word is, right? It's like the whole word is like,
right. So, but people will often ask that question, and yeah, I think there's good. So what I would like to say is I think there's good reasons to think that there are. I think there's good reasons that God.
To say there are reasons is very different than saying I know what the reasons are.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. There's a number of reasons.
Well, if this is any bit of credence to you, so I was reading a book a few years ago. There's that book or the movie Exorcism of Emily Rose. It's based on a real exorcism.
Yeah.
And so I was reading the book on that by the Catholic writers, and the last bit of it has a series of dialogues with the priest, with some of the people possessed, and so one of the things that the priest asked, like, why have you not, like, the demons always say we're damned and kind of shriek at it, and he says, why are you still allowed to reign and not condemned? And they go, we don't know. Now, again, whatever you want to say about that, or however much information they lie, of course, constantly. But the idea is that we don't know.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting, isn't it? That they're rebellion against God, but they don't know.
Is it safe to say that he's a God of second chances, third chances? Like, he's given many chances during this, like, flying around of angels and 2 witnesses and 144,000 over time after time after time after time. He's giving chances. My thought just landed on maybe there's another chance for people to.
Well, this is a good segue to speak about one of the weaknesses.
There you go.
The pre-mill version is people go, okay, so the saints are going to be resurrected to glory in glorious bodies, or resurrected bodies.
The first
at
one
least,
or second?
in the first resurrection, when we go to meet him in the air.
Yep. Before the millennium.
Revelation 19, and we meet him in the air, and then, because we're the army,
And come back down.
but we don't shoot anybody or kill anything. He slays them with the word of his mouth.
Amen.
And then we come back down to reign with him for 1,000 years, the resurrected Christ. So where do the people come from that you rule over or govern? And that's one of the questions. And if you read Revelation carefully, you realize if you are real literal and you add up the numbers, there's still room for some people to survive it. And so you have nations of people surviving into
You're talking about the tribulation.
into the millennium, and then they're going around cleaning up all the warfare stuff, and then creating
In Ezekiel.
so for 1,000 years, and then people go, well, that seems really weird because you're a glorified or resurrected person. And it's like, well, if you remember when Jesus rose from the dead, which we just celebrated, he was walking around and eating with people, and
Not recognized in some ways.
and people came out of the tombs. That's the Bible.
In Matthew.
Yep.
And so there's people walking around who had been dead, so they're resuscitated or whatever. And then Jesus comes, in the book of Acts, he meets the disciples and hangs around with them for 40 days, right?
Yep.
So this notion of having, that's why I'm drawing a distinction, resurrected and glorified, because it's not like the people are shiny. You know what I'm saying? So there is a way of
It's not that weird.
Yeah, it's not that weird, and people are procreating and so forth. And so one of the explanations for why Satan is bound is to demonstrate that even with Christ ruling in a way that's fulfilling the prophecies, like you said, of Ezekiel and others, and we are ruling and reigning like we were told we were going to be, right? Because you can go, well, if everybody's in heaven or the new heavens and the new earth, and we're all ruling and reigning, who are we ruling and reigning over? One another? How does that work? And there's, and again, so this is where figurative language comes in. So I'm not mocking that idea, or that explanation, but what I'm saying is, if you want a reasonable explanation, then we get our chance to rule and reign over fallen humans. And we see good things happen, good things come out of it. And then Satan is released again. And what that demonstrates is that no matter what, fallen human beings will reject God.
Yes, I think it's exactly where I was going with my thoughts.
In other words, nobody worked their way into the new heavens and the new earth. Nobody was
always
good
grace.
enough to move into
Well, you see them even rejecting, even when all the bowl judgments, and you see them rejecting wholeheartedly, fists to God, gnashing, and just cursing God. I mean, in the middle of that.
And they rejected, humans rejected the incarnate Christ veiled in the first century.
Yeah.
And they reject him.
And then they reject him when he is fully known. So it's like totally full on evil.
It amplifies and accentuates.
Is there?
As if the stuff we see going on around us right now isn't demonic enough.
Yeah.
This is going to make it really clear.
Right.
And amillennialism would come in and say, well, what you're describing seems to be what I've said is happening right now.
You bet.
So that's kind of the amillennial.
That's why I'm going to travel down the road with the amillennialists as a historic premill guy. Pretty much in the same way. I'm going to see Revelation as cyclical in its retelling of the story.
Sure.
Where Jesus returns at least 4 times that I know of. The end of the world comes at least 4 times in the book of Revelation.
By a dispensational reading.
No.
You mean
Like
just
if
general reading, yes.
if you read it, and we use the term literally. The everything's happening. The rulers are calling for the rocks to fall on their heads.
Yes.
The islands are flying away. He comes and judges everybody. There's 4 times that I know of.
That's the
where the world
weakness
is.
of
So
amillennialism.
what are some of the extremes in the dispensation camp? Because I still call myself somewhat of a dispensationalist, because I really like the chopping up, if you would, we were talking about. It makes it clear to me. All amillennial has a more like a cleaned up view, but the one that makes the most sense in my mind, tying back to other verses in the Old Testament, is the premill. However, I know there's.
Okay, so as an artist. You
are an artist.
The Amo
Yes,
position is minimalist. It's very elegant. I really like it. And, so I have a tendency to like that. Dispensationalism is more complicated. Like if somebody's studying dispensationalism or reading the Bible dispensationally,
They need a chart.
for 6 months, they're just not going to be able to tell you why I'm a dispensationalist. I'm not saying that to mock anyone. I'm just saying that's just how it is.
I like
So-
I like to see those times because it helps to understand the church. I mean, the church age, the age of grace. It just helps me understand it. And to me, it wasn't super complicated. But I'm not a full-fledged old school. So that was my question: is like, what are the differences between someone who's kind of a leaky one like me, and a
So all the views I say to people, and they freak out because they're so wed to their view. I go, every view I've seen
leaks.
has an almost fatal flaw.
Achilles heel.
Yes, if it's not fatal, it's pretty close, and so I think to find a really big flaw in dispensationalists, you have to go beyond progressive dispensationalism. You have to go back to people I don't really even know anymore, who have this view of. I mean, they're out there, but I just don't run into them anymore. So like people that would say that the second temple is built during the millennium for animal sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because I think progressive dispensationalists will say, no, they're memorial sacrifices. They're not for the atonement of sin or the
Oh, that is a classic dispensational. It is.
Yes.
Wow. Recapitulation. Okay.
Yeah. And there's things like that.
And the other weakness that sometimes I forget if we talked about it in the podcast or if we talked about it after the podcast and it wasn't recorded, because we talk in the same place.
We do.
Is that the key thing I would say, the weakness in dispensationalism is that it says too much in detail, and it sets you up to be predicting things.
Shocked and-
You're moving that
It sets
direction,
people up easily.
and it is implicitly it's desiring intensification of evil because that's where the resolution comes from. It grasps.
Some people.
Yes.
Some
grasps.
people. Yeah.
Yes, and then
grasps.
another critique in the past has been, it's from people outside of the faith, is like, that's an interesting view you have. It seems rather anti-Semitic to me because you Christians get raptured out, and all this wrath is poured out on Jewish people. And it's like, wow, yeah,
I didn't think that.
it's pretty heavy.
It is
so
because
that's-
they've rejected the risen Christ.
Right.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it must be done so that they can.
And
reject
yet
Christ.
it was amillennialism that is basically pegged as the locus of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, the
Well, yeah,
replacement.
history.
Right.
And the thing with amillennialism, the weakness of it is that it ends up inevitably coming, at least with like the medieval Roman Catholic Church, and it would be this, that the church is kind of synonymous with the kingdom of God.
Oh, you're right.
And everything that's going on in this age is essentially, whatever the church is doing is the reign of God.
Okay, so
And-
good or bad, it is kind of blessed because it's
Yes.
kind of sanctified
Yep.
because it's the kingdom
Yep.
of God and the kingdom of man have become one,
They become one. Yeah.
like it says.
Yep.
Okay, so
And
we've all come out with at least one or two of our
yeah.
weaknesses, right?
Yep. And that's why, again, if you look at like the historic creeds and confessions, like very rarely do you have one that gives you a very specific take on the millennium. Although the thing is, you will, as a reader of Revelation, take a position on the millennium. You may listen to this podcast and think, man, these details are just kind of weird. But I think that you're going to have to, because it's a lesson in interpretation of
Amen.
the Bible.
Yes.
The New Testament is eschatological.
It is.
That used to be a controversial statement, but everybody
really?
kind of agrees.
What
with
percent
it.
of the Bible is eschatological? It's something like 30.
100%.
Well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but
you
and
mean
times
like
the apocalyptic.
specifically, yeah.
Apocalyptic. I think I've heard in the realm of 33%. Of,
Oh, really?
Like the Bible. It's a lot, but and I don't know if that number is necessarily true, but I'm like, yeah, and I think that one of the 5 crowns we're receiving is to look up and to await his return. And I think all of us would agree that we were awaiting his return, and we're all just going to keep our hand to the plow. None of us, depending on any of our takes, none of us are going to say, that the second coming isn't a thing. We are all in agreement on a second arrival of Christ.
Which is why full preterism is not
yes. Touch,
orthodox.
and can you really quick go over that?
full preterism. Full preterism is that Jesus came already in the first century, and he came invisibly. That
And then
everything that was that was prophesied or whatever took place by 70.
Gnostics have always said that, and Jehovah's Witnesses have view like that. The Adventists do. So they pop up and say, "Hey, I know says it's physical, but it really was spiritual. You just didn't see it." One thing just to kind of maybe sum up maybe this whole thing, just to give our different perspectives, is that that we often embrace views that are contrary to the ones that we grew up hearing, or there are historical transitions where we go, hey, I'm rejecting that. So we said postmillennialism is very popular. It's partly that is because there's a frustration with the kind of almost fatalistic view, like it's all going to get worse, no gets better. We have no control of what happens. We shouldn't be involved in politics because we're going to be involved in, Christ is going to settle it all. And it's like, we're sick of it. We're sick of waiting around. We're going to do it ourselves. And so there's that part. I'm not postmillennial myself. I'm sympathetic to it in some ways, but I would say this: the dispensational view, the sensational and commercialization of it, is kind of just honestly annoying to me. And so I will admit, exactly. I admit I react to it. Generationally, I react to that, and I will acknowledge that. I'm sure that if it was different, then and
the corny movies they made, some of them.
Yeah, and also too, like it's so part of it is maybe like a generational reaction. So yeah, I acknowledge that, right? It colors my view, but at least I can tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that doesn't mean it's false. It doesn't mean it's a reason that it's not true. It just means from my own experience, that's affected. And I'm sure I'm not by myself.
Yep.
So historic premill, why did you settle there? Who paid you?
That was probably my first reading through just reading the New Testament. And it just seemed simple to me, and so, but I was what's the word? I was marinated in dispensational.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah, that was just everywhere.
High peak.
Yeah, and I was in Southern
Did
California.
any of that color your take?
Yeah, it did actually.
Okay.
I was put off by it actually, but I didn't know why. And it wasn't the exegesis or the hermeneutic,
the passage itself.
It was just like, it was kind of weird to me, and I think the biggest driver to me was when I became a Christian, I was promised suffering, and the entire Bible portrays God's people as always under tribulation and always suffering in horrible ways. Hebrews, sawn in two, and so the idea that I was going to be raptured out didn't really resonate with me, and for I'd say for probably 20 years I was ambivalent. I would go with either of those views, historic premill or a dispensational. I could go either way, and so I would be, my friends and I would be, I'm a pan-tribulationist. Everything's
Oh, geez.
out.
Can I just tell you, that's my least favorite.
Hey, brother, see you here, there, or in the
That's
air.
like Revelations.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, and that was fairly calm. And then, amillennialism was like a new, that was like,
cool.
Well, no, I mean, it was like, whoa, that's interesting. I would have never come to that. So when I first encountered it.
Yeah.
And then postmillennialism.
It's not intuitive.
Like, I had friends in Grass Valley in the 80s who were theonomists.
For me, the reason I landed with this viewpoint is because it's very personal to me, having gone through massive anxiety attacks and like massive panic attacks, and wondering, how to heal it. And God just was like, you need to draw close to me, and I'll draw close to you. So I started to do that, and lo and behold, Revelation was the study we were doing at the time at BSF, and I hopped on, and I tell you what, that verse means a lot to me, that you'll receive a blessing, because my blessing was to not be afraid of the future, and so it really started to really squelch the anxiety that I had, because it was all death related, right? Anxieties, having kids and like not being here for them and watching them suffer without me and all this stuff. And through the years, this book and the viewpoint I have on it is they call it escapism, but yeah, of course I want to escape. And so I think what also colored my glasses, I would say, to answer that part of it, is I saw these, I guess, angry Calvinists, I guess, beating their backs like, oh, we need to be purified kind of thing. And it's like, that is a silly thing to say. What was the cross of Christ then? And why did they say to encourage one another with these words? And I just was like, and those might have been extreme cases of, I guess, amillennialism or whatever, or extreme beliefs in that regard.
It sounds like we were all in some way responding to something really negative about the other views.
So that's why I wanted to be fair and give that, I jumped on mine.
But not everyone does that. A lot of people are just like, nope, I just read the Bible with no presuppositions objectively, and I came to truth. And I'm not even saying just truth in general, but I mean that's true of all of us. And I think it's good to kind of like not take yourself so seriously that you.
I think so too.
You miss out on that too.
That's a wonderful way to.
But I do think we probably could wrap it up here too. Just give your comments, but I think that there's definitely we've said it before too, like a very much an encouragement and a trajectory towards hope that is through the whole New Testament. And honestly, I mean, one thing through our own world's history, we do see a lot of things that dramatically come in that change, even without the stuff happening. We see like revivals, we see bad governments fall. So there is a part where you're like, Lord, you're doing something in history, and the best part is the whole final thing. You are the Lord of it. And you'll bring it to a close.
That's why I find great affinity, and I like hanging out with amillennialists and postmillennialists, because I don't know if the tribulation that we're heading into or whatever, if I was in the World War II generation, the tribulation we were right in the middle of, I don't know if that's the great one. In the book of Revelation, it's the thlipsis, it's the crisis, and it says it's the tribulation, the great one.
Yes.
Not the great tribulation. It's the tribulation, because there's all these tribulations going on.
Predication of
and so like, I don't have to think that because everything is out of control, or like, say if I lived in China in 1948 and all the missionaries are getting kicked out and I'm a Christian, some people say that some views caused a lot of apostasy in the Chinese church, because they thought this couldn't happen. This couldn't possibly happen and Jesus not show up. Right. And so I have the view that it can be really bad and still not be the tribulation,
Absolutely.
the great one.
And it can get worse.
Right.
Absolutely.
It can get better.
And so it can get better.
It can get better.
But the gates of hell will not prevail. That we do know.
I want to be in the getting better time. Like when I came over, I told you guys I was agitated. I'm kind of disappointed, even though I was promised this as a young Christian, you're going to have tribulation. And Jesus said that, right? And yet I'm like, dang it. I didn't want to go through this. And it's a lot of work to deal with the culture. And I would have liked to, and do I think we're heading into the Great Tribulation in 5 years? I have no idea. I hope it turns around, because I want to live in one of those.
But I got to say, growing babies in artificial wombs in a lab is getting there. It's getting there. And it's getting to something, you guys. And whether we believe in pre, mid, or post tribs, listen, it's getting to the point. Listen, yeah, absolutely. All kinds of earthquakes. I mean, we talk about, he didn't tell us that for no reason. You can know the season. You cannot know the date.
I'm not a sensationalist, but I found myself saying under my breath, demons. More times than I ever had.
Listen, guys, you should see my algorithm. It's all friggin' Amir Sarfati. It's all like, Temple Institute. I follow close. You just got to be able to look everywhere in God's word. You can't just like stick on the one thing, in my opinion.
Yep.
But so anyway.
Well,
fun talk, guys.
That was great. I really enjoyed doing this with you guys.
It was enlightening for
I was enlightening for you guys, and I hope that you ultimately look the scriptures yourself, because that's what you're told to do, and I think I know you'll be blessed. So and you'll be
comforted. So in Revelation,
especially
those who read it
out loud.
Read it aloud.
That's why I
love. Says that.
That's why I loved how you read it aloud.
And I read it aloud.
He did.
So subscribe so you can hear us read more stuff
Subscribe.
aloud.
Maybe Ryan will just read the
Smash
whole
the
thing.
like button.
Smash it. Bye, guys.
Bye.